We're encouraged in our meditation practice to develop our powers of discernment, our ability to discriminate between where we want to direct our focus and where we don't want to direct our focus. And this is often simplified into giving attention to the real and disregarding the unreal. And this very clear instruction is just also very capable of being quite elusive, slippery, hard to kind of get our heads around. So what we're trying to do is to ignore the unreal and focus on the real. But what is it that's real and what is it that's unreal? Because all of this seems very real, doesn't it? It all seems like it's what's going on. So if we're going to accept that challenge and develop our skills to be able to distinguish and tell apart what's real from unreal, what exactly are we trying to do? And in the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, attention is given to explaining this. But even still, we can find ourselves falling trapped as a result of trying to do something which is beyond our capacity to actually understand. So what I mean by that is, if we're going to try and distinguish and determine what is real from unreal, but the only thing that we have as our base to work off is the unreal, then how are we ever going to know what is real? So if we're being told that everything that we're experiencing is unreal, it's unreal, and what you need to do is to see past it to find the real, how are we supposed to do that when all we know is unreal? I was thinking in relation to this, I have friends, people I know who don't like to sit down and watch animated movies, animated films. They just find that to sit down and commit themselves to watching some Disney or Pixar movie for an hour and a half or however long it might be is offensive to their own sense of maturity. What kind of adult sits down and watches a kid's cartoon? For God's sake. And in that, I think there's something that can help us to understand what's going on in relation to the real and the unreal. Because as an adult, we have a sense of what it means to be an adult. And adults, if they are truly adults, shouldn't be watching kids' cartoons, even if it is retitled as an animated movie. It's still a cartoon. But for those adults who are able to sit down and watch a kid's cartoon or an animated movie, there's something which they have to acknowledge, and that is that they are willing to accept that what they are watching is at some level taking place. At some level, it is real. They have to, because if they don't, they won't enjoy it. And for those adults who don't enjoy it, it's simply for the basic fact that they can't accept it to be real at any level. And even if we move away from animated movies, or as we say here in Ireland, films. So if we move away from animated films and we think of films as a whole, when we sit down and commit ourselves to watching a movie for 90 minutes or an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it might be, we are accepting that we're entering into a world of make-believe. A world where what's going on is not in fact real, but we're willing to accept that it's real so as to be able to enjoy it, to participate in it. And thinking about this, I'm reminded of a story which I heard regarding Paramahansayogananda. I think Roy told this story, but I'm not sure. Where he went to the cinema to see a movie based on the life of George Washington. And George Washington is killed during the movie. And then the movie has some remaining part and then it finishes. So Paramahansayogananda decided to stay in the movie theater, in the cinema hall, and watch the movie again. But he decided that he would leave just before George Washington was killed, so that he could leave the movie with the idea that George Washington wasn't killed and everything that he had achieved up until his death was all positive. And that's what Paramahansayogananda was able to leave the theater in his mind. And I think in this, there's a demonstration of how we have the capacity to engage in the unreal on our own terms. And the only reason we can do this, the only way that we can engage in the unreal on our own terms, is by fully understanding what is real. So Yogananda was able to appreciate that what he was doing was just luring his mental processes into appreciating George Washington and all he had achieved without having to acknowledge his death. And so he gets to leave the cinema on a high. But he knows that all of it is just a fabrication, regardless. And he even spoke about this. He often used the metaphor of the film, the cinema film, which is placed over the projector light to create the images on the screen. He used this as a way to talk about how we experience reality. That reality is that what we experience is nothing more than a film being placed over our pure spirit, the light from within us. Now, as a metaphor, we can kind of appreciate what he's pointing at here, that what we're experiencing is not real, that it is, in effect, a series of experiences, of images, which have been conjured up as a result of the film being placed over the light of our spirit. But what is that film that's been placed over the light of our spirit? What is it that is distorting or projecting out these images onto the screen of life? And that film, essentially, can be understood to be the mind. That's what's doing it. So the mind can be paralleled to that film with its different frames. And then that mind is placed over our pure conscious awareness, our, if you want to call it, our spirit, the light of who we are at an essential level. And then that light becomes distorted as it projects out through the mind, and then it conjures up reality as we experience it. And that reality as we experience it is the unreal. Now, the challenge in this is that we start to question, okay, well, if this is unreal, does that mean that none of this exists? That this world doesn't exist, our friends don't exist, our families don't exist? And this is where we can get caught up or find ourselves tripping over conceptual ideas, even if they are presented as metaphors. And the beauty of a metaphor is that it leaves us stumbling over our capacity to make absolute sense of it. So when Yogananda uses that analogy of the cinema film being placed over the light of the projector, we can appreciate what's going on, and we can even try and transfer it onto what we're experiencing. At some level, we are that pure light and we are projecting through some film, and then we're conjuring up this reality. And it makes sense to us at a certain level, but there's a lot to it that just eludes us. It's kind of escapes our capacity to get our head around. And so we start asking questions. Well, does that mean that none of this is real? None of this is actually going on? And that's not the case. This is going on. The world is the world. Your body is your body. Water is water. But at the same time, I can say the world is not the world. You're not your body, and water is not water. Because the apparatus which does that labeling, the apparatus which is able to process those concepts, the apparatus which is leading to that kind of understanding is the mind. And so the mind is putting a film over the direct experience. And that direct experience just is. And it's impossible for us to talk around it, because once we try to talk around it, I have to use words like water. I have to use words like I and body and world. And so the direct experience becomes fragmented, broken up, unreal. I was thinking in relation to a movie that I think it was released either today or yesterday or maybe in the past few days. It's a horror movie called The Omen. And you might be familiar with one of the original Omen, which I believe was released in the 70s. And I was thinking about, if we go into the cinema and we sit down to watch this horror movie, and I'm picking a horror movie because it helps. I think we can all agree that a horror movie has a certain kind of effect on us that makes it very easy to understand just how the unreal can impact on us. Because if we go into the cinema and we go into the theater and we sit down and we subject ourselves to an hour and a half or 2 hours of a horror movie, in this case, The Omen, and we watch it, we find ourselves being caught up in the narrative. We know when we're walking in that this is just a movie. Yet, as we live through the experience of watching it, it affects us. It has an impact on us. So much so, in fact, that when we leave the movie theater, we can find ourselves looking over our shoulder, being a bit on edge. Something happens and it jostles us, upsets us. Because what has occurred during the 90 minutes, then the 2 hours of this horror movie, has become part of our mental processes. It has entangled itself in our framework of what's going on. And so when we leave the theater, we find ourselves on edge. And so with that, then, we can ask ourselves the question, how well are we able to leave the movie theater? To leave the theater and not have anything that we've just experienced while watching that movie affect us. Because the movie's going to affect us at different aspects of our being. So we can say that when we leave the movie theater, that rationally we can acknowledge that it wasn't real. It didn't take place. It was just a movie. Rationally, we can reassure ourselves like this. And so our conscious thinking mind is very able to put it into a frame of reference which makes us understand that it wasn't a real experience. Nonetheless, what we have experienced is still playing around as energetically, as in it's creating an emotional response within us. So even though while rationally we can say it didn't happen, it wasn't real, emotionally, energetically, we can still be responding because of what we've just experienced. And then, in terms of the mental impressions that we have been subjected to, which have been impressed upon our unconscious. So, what I'm talking about here is that aspect of our thinking processes which we are not privy to, those aspects of our thinking processes which are beyond our conscious awareness. So they're unconscious to us, but they are still buried away as, if you want to say, samskaras, as impressions on the deep mind. So they're there. So although we can walk out of the movie theater and say, okay, that was just a movie, rationally, we understand it, we can accept it. But then the energetic effect still has an influence over us. And the impressions which have been stored away in our deep mind, they may not be troublesome now, but we don't know when they might be troublesome. So how able are we to walk out of a movie theater and disregard, absolutely disregard everything that we have just experienced at a rational thinking level, at an emotional, energetic level, and at a deep cyclical level? How well can we just turn it all off as if it didn't occur? Because essentially, when we sit down to meditate, that's exactly what we're trying to do. The real from the unreal. We're trying to exercise our ability to move away from identifying with everything that has taken place, which is just present within us at a mental level, and consequently at an energetic level. So when we say discern the real from the unreal, we now know that the real is everything which is to be experienced without the interruption of mental processes. That's the real. So the real just is, and nothing can describe it. It's the experience. And in our meditation practice, we're trying to just have the experience, but the experience of what? The experience of being as awareness. Because in our meditation practice, we are endeavoring to let go of identification with anything that's occurring at a physical, rational, thinking level, anything that's occurring at an energetic level in terms of our sensations and our emotions, and then any rising thought waves that might come up unexpectedly, we're trying to let go of them too. So we're trying to walk out of the theater of our lives. We sit down in our meditation cushion, we close our eyes, and we're trying to disregard the whole movie of the last however many decades it might be. Just disregard it. So you can see just how big a task this is. But our meditation practice is a training ground. It's a training ground so as to be able to know the real from the unreal, to be able to have a direct experience of what it means to experience the real without it being interrupted by the unreal. That's what our formal meditation practice is about. But of course, we don't want to live our lives like that. We're still like Paramahansayogananda as he watched the George Washington movie. He's able to take from it from what he wants. And we too, engaging in life, we're able to experience it and enjoy it and celebrate it. But this is far easier and a lot more accessible to us when we know the real from the unreal. Because if we bring it back to our analogy about going to the cinema, if we walk out of the cinema theater and we think that the movie's still going, then our lives will be very complicated. We have to know how we are buying into a certain experience so as to enjoy it. So when we go to the movie theater, even if it is an animated movie, we allow ourselves to buy into it, to accept it at the level that it's at, so that we can enjoy it. And this is the same of our lives. We buy into it. We buy into the reality of our lives, which is based on a conceptual structure, which is fundamental for us to be able to exist as socialized human beings. We buy into it. And we enjoy it. But we enjoy it more when we know that it is fundamentally unreal. Primarily because it's being fragmented by the film of the mind. And so what we're trying to do is to take what we experience in our formal meditation practice, that experience of the real, the experience of being awareness, of our existence as being aware of being aware. And when we get off our meditation cushion and we engage in life, we know that this is what's present within us. And everything else that's going on is continuously changing, transient, moving, just like the different scenes or clips or frames within a movie. Keeps them shifting, shifting, shifting. But the light that shines through the film is the same. And for us, the awareness that we have is the same. It's always there. And this is real.